Arctic uncovered. Beyond the polar night, the rhythm of ice and silence. The Arctic is not simply a place. It is a threshold, a vast white circle at the top of the world where maps feel incomplete and silence has weight. From afar, it appears empty, frozen, distant, untouched. A landscape so still it almost seems unreal, as if the planet paused here and forgot to continue. But the stillness is deceptive. Silence in the Arctic is not peace. It is pressure. A quiet so immense that it presses inward, amplifying the smallest movement. The faint crack of shifting ice, the distant groan of glaciers adjusting under their own ancient weight. Ice stretches in every direction, dissolving the horizon. Distance loses meaning. Time softens. Nothing seems to move. Nothing seems to live. And yet beneath that white expanse, the ocean is awake. Deep under the ice, currents move with slow, deliberate force. Invisible rivers carrying heat, salt, and microscopic life through darkness that never truly rests. The ice above is not a barrier. It is a ceiling, thin in places, thick in others, resting over an ecosystem as complex as any rainforest. The Arctic does not advertise its life. It conceals it. Here, survival is not loud. It is efficient. The architecture of light. Before any creature defines this region, before wind or storm asserts itself, there is something more fundamental. A rhythm. The Arctic is governed not by borders or seasons in the traditional sense, but by light and by its absence. For months at a time, the sun disappears completely. It slips below the horizon and leaves the land suspended in an extended twilight. Not true darkness, but a dim, cold blue that lingers for weeks. Edges blur. Shadows lose their meaning. Distance becomes uncertain. In this prolonged dusk, the world does not look asleep. It looks paused, as though the earth itself is holding its breath. Without the sun's arc to measure the day, time transforms. It is no longer counted in hours. It is measured in endurance, in reflection, in how long something can last before energy must be restored. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sun returns, not in warmth, but in exposure. It skims low along the horizon, casting sharp light across frozen surfaces. Ice becomes mirrored, snow becomes silver, brightness spreads outward until the land feels almost too illuminated to trust. But this light is not comfort. It is revelation. Reflections scatter in every direction. Depth flattens. Navigation becomes guesswork in a world with few landmarks. What appears solid may be thin. What seems close may be miles away. The Arctic teaches quickly. Light does not guarantee clarity. Cold is law. If light defines perception, cold defines survival. Here, cold is not merely temperature. It is governance. It thickens oil and blood. It drains batteries. It stiffens metal and muscle alike. Hesitation has consequence. Delay has cost. For every living organism, cold becomes a clock. How long can a hunt last before energy is lost? How far can a body travel before heat drops too low? How quickly must calories be replaced? Strength alone means little here. Survival belongs to timing, to efficiency, to conserving without stopping. Even the ocean responds to this law. As sea ice forms and retreats, currents shift, openings appear, boundaries between water and air rewrite themselves again and again. From above, the Arctic appears static, but beneath, it is constantly recalibrating. Darkness compresses the world into silence. Brightness exposes every fracture. Together, light and cold construct a system where stability is temporary and adaptation is permanent. The Arctic does not reward dominance. It rewards endurance. Beneath the ceiling of ice, under the sea ice, another world exists. Darkness here is not emptiness. It is habitat. Deep currents move like a hidden bloodstream, transporting nutrients from ocean depths to the underside of frozen ceilings. In waters that appear barren from above, microscopic abundance thrives. Plankton drift in slow constellations. Tiny organisms transform minerals into life, forming the base of a food web that supports fish, seals, whales, and apex predators. All of it sustained without direct sunlight. Some organisms glow faintly in the dark. Bioluminescence flickers, not as decoration, but as communication, as camouflage, as survival strategy. Adaptation in the Arctic does not announce itself dramatically. It refines itself quietly. Life becomes smaller, more efficient, alert to the slightest vibration or shift in pressure. Above them, the ice flexes, it drifts, fractures, seals itself, then breaks again. Leads of dark water appear suddenly, windows between ocean and sky, then close without warning. With each freeze and melt, oxygen levels shift, nutrient flows change. Light penetrates in narrow shafts that alter behavior below. Even a crack only meters wide can reset the balance between hunter and hunted. The Arctic surface may appear solid, but it is rewriting itself continuously. The ice is not a wall, it is a veil, the winter of suspension. When full winter settles in, silence deepens, wind calms, ice thickens, movement slows. The Arctic does not sleep, but it conserves. The land breathes slowly, as if storing strength for a future release. Months pass, where the loudest sound may be the distant crack of pressure ridges, adjusting under stress. In many regions, no human footprint exists. Large areas remain unmapped. Vast territories where neither boots nor instruments have fully recorded the terrain. Even the ocean floor remains incomplete, blank spaces on scientific charts beneath kilometers of frozen water. Satellites observe from above, but interpretation is often fragmented. Strange fractures appear without warning. Light phenomena drift across skies. Shadows move beneath snow, where explanation lags behind observation. Each discovery raises more questions than answers. The Arctic does not yield clarity easily. It offers fragments, the illusion of mastery. Modern exploration arrives with tools, icebreakers, satellites, submersibles, capable of descending beneath frozen layers. Yet technology does not erase mystery. What might be visible one day vanishes the next. Cracks close. Weather shifts. Conditions reset. Exploration here is not conquest, it is negotiation. The Arctic decides what will be revealed and when. Human instinct seeks to categorize, measure, define. The Arctic resists. It does not respond on demand. It does not guarantee completion. It challenges not only our equipment, but our expectations. We are not masters here. We are visitors, and the land determines how much of itself we are permitted to understand. A frontier that withholds. What makes the Arctic powerful is not only its physical barrier of ice, it is the deeper sensation that something larger is operating beneath perception. A rhythm older than human civilization. A cycle that continues regardless of observation. Discovery here requires patience. Sometimes the land reveals its secrets slowly. Other times, it retracts them just as clarity seems near. This unpredictability isn't failure. It is identity. The Arctic does not offer a complete picture. It offers pieces. And the question becomes not just what we find, but what the Arctic has chosen to show us today. Ice as memory, the archive of the planet. The Arctic is not only a landscape, it is a record. Beneath every frozen layer lies time itself, compressed and preserved in silence. The ice here does not simply cover the land. It remembers. Each snowfall becomes a page. Each winter seals another chapter. Layer upon layer, the Arctic builds an archive of the atmosphere, an untouched record stretching back thousands of years. When scientists drill into the ice sheets, they are not just extracting frozen water. They are reading history. Tiny bubbles trapped within the ice hold ancient air, breaths from centuries long before cities, engines, or industry. The chemistry of those bubbles reveals past climates, past temperatures, even past catastrophes. The Arctic stores the memory of the planet in cold suspension, and it does so without distortion. Unlike forests that burn or oceans that churn and mix, the deep ice remains still. It protects what it captures. This is why the Arctic is not merely a remote region. It is one of Earth's greatest climate archives, the weight of ice. The ice sheets are not fragile surfaces. They are massive structures, kilometers thick in some regions, pressing downward with immense force. Under that weight, mountains bend slowly. Rock grinds into dust. Land sinks and rises over centuries. Glaciers move, not quickly, not visibly from moment to moment, but relentlessly. They carve valleys. They reshape coastlines. They transport stone across vast distances. The Arctic is not frozen in time. It is sculpting time. Every crack that echoes across a frozen plain is a reminder that motion continues beneath the appearance of stillness. Even the sound of ice breaking is not chaos. It is adjustment, a surface that rewrites itself. From space, the Arctic appears as a clean white expanse, but zoom closer, and the surface reveals complexity. Pressure ridges rise like frozen waves. Leads of dark water slice across the ice in jagged lines. Polynyas, persistent open water areas, appear in places that should be sealed by cold. These features shift constantly. Wind pushes ice outward from coastlines. Currents pull it apart. Temperature gradients thicken some regions while thinning others. The Arctic Ocean is not capped by a stable lid. It is covered by a dynamic mosaic, and that mosaic changes daily. This instability shapes everything above and below. Animals depend on predictable ice thickness. Hunters rely on stable travel routes. Microorganisms require specific light penetration. When the ice changes, the entire system recalibrates. The ocean floor, the unknown continent. While satellites track the surface, the depths remain largely unmapped. The Arctic seafloor is one of the least explored regions on Earth. Vast underwater ridges stretch beneath frozen waters. Submerged mountain chains divide basins. Hydrothermal vents may exist in places yet to be fully documented. Exploration here is difficult. Ice blocks access for much of the year. Darkness limits visibility. Extreme cold strains equipment. Even with modern submersibles and sonar mapping, large areas remain incomplete. Blank spaces still exist on scientific charts. In an age where most of the planet has been surveyed, the Arctic continues to resist full understanding. Time moves differently. Here in the Arctic, scale distorts perception. A storm can form suddenly and disappear within hours. Yet glaciers move only meters per year. Sea ice forms in weeks. Ice sheets accumulate over millennia. This compression and expansion of time create a landscape that feels both ancient and immediate. A single season can reshape migration patterns. A single decade can alter coastlines. Yet the deeper structures operate on timescales far beyond human memory. Standing here, it becomes difficult to measure change. Is this land stable, or is it mid-transition? The answer is both. Signals in the sky above the frozen terrain. The atmosphere reveals another layer of complexity. The Arctic sky is not empty. High-altitude clouds form in unusual structures. Temperature inversions trap cold air near the surface, and at times, light behaves in unexpected ways. Halo effects encircle the sun. Sundogs shimmer beside it. Mirages distort distant landscapes. Optical phenomena here are not rare. They are part of the environment's language. Cold air bends light differently. Ice crystals suspended in the atmosphere refract and scatter illumination into geometric shapes. To an untrained observer, these displays can feel surreal, almost supernatural. But they are the result of physics, operating under extreme conditions. The Arctic reminds us that science and wonder are not opposites. They coexist. The sense of withholding. Despite technological advancement, there remains an undeniable feeling when standing in the Arctic. It is not fully revealing itself. Data is collected, maps are drawn, models are built, yet uncertainty persists. Cracks appear without warning. Ice collapses in unexpected patterns. Weather systems behave unpredictably. Scientists refine their projections constantly. But the Arctic resists simplification. It behaves like a living system rather than a static region. And living systems are rarely linear. A delicate threshold. The Arctic also exists at a climatic threshold. Small temperature shifts have amplified consequences here. Because ice reflects sunlight, changes in coverage alter energy absorption. Because permafrost stores carbon, thawing releases gases long trapped in frozen soil. These processes do not occur dramatically in a single moment. They unfold gradually, quietly, but with measurable impact. The Arctic functions as both indicator and amplifier. What happens here does not stay here. Ocean currents connect polar waters to distant coasts. Atmospheric circulation links Arctic air to mid-latitude weather systems. The top of the world influences the rest of it. Beneath the silence, continuity, even during the deepest winter, when darkness dominates and temperatures plummet, processes continue. Seawater remains in motion. Heat exchanges persist between ocean and atmosphere. Life adapts rather than retreats. The Arctic is not dormant, it is conserving. Its apparent emptiness masks continuous adjustment, and that adjustment is constant. A landscape that teaches patience. Exploration in the Arctic requires a different mindset. Not speed, not conquest, but patience. Researchers wait for safe ice conditions. Hunters observe subtle wind shifts before traveling. Communities plan around seasonal cycles that cannot be forced. The land dictates timing, and resisting that timing leads to failure. The Arctic does not reward urgency, it rewards awareness. The memory beneath our feet. If one were to stand on the thick interior ice of Greenland, beneath their boots would lie hundreds of thousands of years of preserved snowfall. Ancient atmospheres compressed into fragile bubbles, traces of volcanic eruptions, shifts in greenhouse gas concentrations, evidence of warming and cooling cycles long before modern civilization. The ice remembers what humans forget. It holds a continuity that outlasts individual lifetimes. And as layers accumulate, the arcade deepens. The quiet power of the Arctic. The Arctic does not announce itself with tropical storms or dense forests. Its power is subtle. It lies in balance, in thresholds, in feedback loops that operate silently but influence global systems. This region may appear remote, but it is not disconnected. It is foundational. And perhaps what makes it most compelling is not only what we understand about it, but what remains uncertain. Because even after centuries of exploration, there are still areas where the Arctic chooses silence, still depths unmeasured, still patterns unfolding beyond immediate comprehension. The choreography of survival. At first glance, the Arctic appears empty, but emptiness here is an illusion. Beneath the snow, across the ice, under the dark ocean ceiling, life moves in patterns too subtle to notice from afar. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. Every movement is measured. Every decision carries weight, because in the Arctic, survival is not a constant state. It is a continuous negotiation. The edge of ice, where life begins. Life in the Arctic often begins at the margins, at the edge where solid ice meets open water. This boundary is not stable. It advances. It retreats. It reshapes itself with wind and temperature. But it is here, at this unstable threshold, that productivity explodes. As sunlight returns in spring, even at a low angle, it penetrates thin ice and stimulates microscopic algae growing on its underside. These organisms bloom rapidly. Within days, what looked barren becomes a suspended cloud of life. Phytoplankton multiply, zooplankton feed, fish gather. The entire food web accelerates in response to light. This burst does not last long. The Arctic summer is brief, so life here does not unfold slowly. It surges. The masters of timing Arctic wildlife does not rely on strength alone. It relies on precision. A polar bear does not wander aimlessly across the ice. It calculates. It conserves energy, so walking long distances only when scent, wind direction, and ice stability align. Each step is an investment. Too much movement wastes calories. Too little movement risks starvation. Seals beneath the ice maintain breathing holes. They memorize their locations. They listen for vibrations above. A fraction of a second determines escape or capture. Nothing in this landscape moves without consequence. Beneath the ice, the hidden hunt. Under the frozen ceiling, another choreography unfolds. Fish navigate through narrow light shafts. When cracks open, predators adjust depth, depending on oxygen levels and temperature layers. Marine mammals surface at leads that may close hours later. Even whales, massive and powerful, are constrained by the geometry of ice. They follow migration routes, carved not by roads, but by seasonal openings. One miscalculation can mean entrapment, and yet, year after year, these routes are repeated, not because they are easy, but because they are necessary. The short season of abundance. When summer arrives, it arrives quickly. Ice retreats, water opens, light expands across the horizon for nearly 24 hours a day. And in that brief window, life accelerates. Migratory birds return from distant continents. They travel thousands of kilometers to nest in the Arctic. Why? Because here, during summer, food becomes temporarily abundant. Insects hatch in massive numbers. Vegetation pushes through thawed soil. Small mammals emerge. But this abundance is fragile. It exists for weeks, not months. So breeding cycles are compressed. Eggs hatch rapidly. Young grow fast. There is no time for delay. The Arctic does not allow extended childhood. It demands readiness, camouflage, and silence. On land, survival depends on invisibility. The Arctic fox shifts its coat from brown to white with the seasons. Ptarmigan feathers match snow cover. Even predators rely on blending into a landscape of white and shadow. Color here is strategy. Movement is restraint. A single silhouette against open ice can be detected from kilometers away. So creatures move low. They pause often. They wait. Patience is not passive. It is active discipline. The energy equation. In warmer regions, animals may hunt multiple times per day. In the Arctic, energy budgeting is precise. Every calorie gained must exceed the calories spent acquiring it. If the balance tips too far in the wrong direction, consequences are immediate. This is why Arctic animals often appear calm. They are not lethargic. They are efficient. Muscles are built for endurance, not display. Fat layers insulate and store energy. Behavior reduces unnecessary exposure. This ecosystem operates on an energy economy. There is no margin for extravagance. Ice as foundation sea ice is not merely frozen water. It is infrastructure. Polar bears use it as a hunting platform. Walruses rest on it between feeding dives. Seals rely on it to protect pups from marine predators. Remove stable ice and the choreography shifts. Routes lengthen. Distances increase. Risk multiplies. The Arctic system depends not only on cold, but on predictable cold. And when predictability changes, so does behavior. Migration without landmarks. In a landscape with few visual markers, navigation depends on instinct and memory. Caribou migrate across tundra, following ancient routes. They move in vast herds, synchronized not by command, but by shared impulse. Ocean currents guide fish. Magnetic cues orient birds. The Arctic is not empty of direction. It is full of invisible maps. These maps are written in wind patterns, star positions, ocean chemistry, and they are learned, passed down, not through language, but through repetition. Resilience in uncertainty. The most remarkable trait of Arctic wildlife is not its toughness, it is its adaptability.
Here, the polar
Conditions
bear
change
reigns.
constantly. Storms rise quickly. Ice fractures unpredictably. Temperatures swing. Yet species persist, not because the environment is stable, but because instability is expected. Flexibility is survival. Rigid systems fail here. Responsive systems endure. The predator and the prey. In many ecosystems, predator-prey relationships follow predictable cycles. In the Arctic, these cycles are compressed and amplified. A single poor hunting season can impact reproductive success. A delayed ice formation can disrupt feeding opportunities. Everything is connected. If plankton blooms shift timing, fish populations respond. If fish populations fluctuate, seals adjust. If seals move differently, polar bears must recalibrate. The Arctic functions as a chain reaction, and that chain is delicate. Life beneath the snow. Even beneath the tundra's frozen surface, activity continues. Small mammals tunnel under snow layers for insulation. Microbial life persists in frozen soils. Permafrost, though solid, contains dormant organisms capable of revival when thawed. Life in the Arctic does not disappear in winter. It repositions, it slows, it conserves, and waits. The human eye sees stillness. From a distance, the Arctic appears quiet, a white expanse, a calm horizon. But zoom closer, listen longer, and patterns emerge. Tracks in snow reveal movement unseen hours earlier. Subtle ripples beneath thin ice indicate marine life below. The Arctic does not advertise activity, it whispers it, and only those who pay attention begin to notice. A system without excess. There is no redundancy in the Arctic. Each species occupies a precise role. Each timing event aligns with another. If one link weakens, the effects travel outward. This is not a chaotic ecosystem. It is a tightly calibrated one. And calibration requires balance. Survival is art. Perhaps what makes Arctic wildlife so compelling is not merely that it survives beautifully. Movements across ice resemble choreography. Birds wheel across low sunlight in synchronized arcs. Caribou traverse tundra like flowing rivers of motion. Even the slow breathing of a seal at a hole in the ice feels deliberate. There is grace in adaptation. There is elegance in efficiency. And that elegance is born not from comfort, but from necessity. The lesson in motion. The Arctic teaches a quiet lesson. Strength isn't domination. It is alignment. Animals here do not attempt to overpower the environment. They align with it. They move when it allows. They pause when it demands. They endure when it tests. This choreography of survival has repeated for thousands of years, not unchanged, but unbroken. The depth we are only. Beginning to understand, scientists continue to study migration routes, feeding grounds, behavioral shifts, but the full picture remains incomplete. Because observation here is difficult, conditions change faster than data can be collected, and yet, layer by layer, understanding grows. The Arctic reveals its wildlife, not as spectacle, but as process, a living system unfolding in real time. The sky that speaks, the people who listen. When the Arctic sky darkens fully and the land falls into its longest night, something extraordinary begins to move above. At first, it is only a faint shimmer, a thin arc of pale green stretching across the horizon. Then it grows. Light bends, color deepens, the sky begins to flow. The aurora borealis does not flash like lightning. It breathes. It pulses in silent waves, curling and unfolding, as if the atmosphere itself were alive. Scientifically, the explanation is precise. Charged particles from the sun travel millions of kilometers through space. They collide with Earth's magnetic field. They excite atoms in the upper atmosphere. Oxygen glows green and red. Nitrogen glows purple and blue. The result is physics in motion, energy becoming visible. But explanation does not diminish impact, because standing beneath the aurora is not merely observing a reaction. It feels like witnessing a conversation between Earth and space. The Arctic sky becomes a screen for invisible forces. And for a few moments, what is normally hidden becomes luminous, the unpredictable spectacle. No two auroras are identical. Their shapes shift constantly. Curtains of light ripple. Spirals form and dissolve. Brightness intensifies, then fades. Even with satellites monitoring solar activity, exact timing and intensity remain difficult to predict. The aurora retains unpredictability, and that unpredictability is part of its power. It reminds us that nature still holds domains beyond complete control. We can measure it, we can model it, but we cannot command it. Stories in the sky. For thousands of years, indigenous Arctic communities have watched these lights. Long before scientific explanation, the aurora carried meaning. Some traditions speak of ancestral spirits moving across the heavens. Others interpret the lights as guidance, warnings, or reminders of the connection between sky and earth. These interpretations are not naive attempts to explain physics. They are reflections of lived experience. When you inhabit a land of long darkness, the sky becomes more than background. It becomes narrative. It becomes presence. And in the Arctic, survival has always depended not only on reading ice and wind, but on reading the sky. The people of the frozen circle. The Arctic is not empty. It is home. Communities have lived here for centuries, adapting to cycles of light and cold that would overwhelm the unprepared. Their homes are designed for insulation. Their clothing is engineered through tradition. Their travel follows seasonal knowledge, accumulated over generations. Survival here has never meant conquering nature. It has meant aligning with it. Hunters read subtle snowdrift patterns to predict wind shifts. Elders recall sea ice behavior from decades past. Stories preserve lessons about storms, animals, and timing. This knowledge is not stored in books alone. It lives in memory, in language, in shared experience. Communal strength. Long winters bring extended darkness, but they also bring community. Families gather indoors, while wind moves across frozen plains outside. Stories are told, songs are shared, traditions are practiced. These rituals are not decoration. They are resilience. Isolation can erode morale. Darkness can distort perception. Community restores balance. And in the Arctic, balance is everything. Modern tools, ancient wisdom technology has arrived in the Arctic. Snowmobiles replace sleds in some regions. GPS, supports navigation. Satellite communication bridges distance. Yet technology does not replace traditional knowledge. It supplements it. Because when batteries fail in extreme cold, when signals disappear, understanding of land and weather remains the most reliable guide. The Arctic continues to demand respect. It does not tolerate arrogance, and those who thrive here understand that adaptation is ongoing. The Arctic as teacher. What the Arctic ultimately reveals is not domination, but humility. It demonstrates that survival depends on awareness, on restraint, on timing. The land operates on rhythms larger than individual ambition. It reshapes coastlines without urgency. It stores atmospheric memory without commentary. It moves ice and water according to laws that do not negotiate. And yet, within that system, life flourishes, wildlife adapts, communities endure. Light dances across winter skies, a region that reflects the planet. The Arctic is not isolated from the rest of Earth. Ocean currents connect it to distant continents. Atmospheric systems link it to global weather. Changes here echo outward. But beyond science, the Arctic represents something deeper. It is a reminder that vastness still exists. That mystery remains, that not every landscape has been fully translated into certainty. In an era of constant connection and mapped terrain, the Arctic retains areas of silence, and that silence matters. The final horizon stand at the edge of sea ice at midnight sun, or beneath a winter aurora. Look outward. The horizon appears endless, but it is not emptiness you are seeing. It is continuity. Currents moving beneath ice, animals traveling invisible routes, communities preserving memory. Particles from the sun, igniting distant air. Everything here is connected. The Arctic does not shout its importance. It demonstrates it quietly, through rhythm, through endurance, through light that returns after months of absence. The circle remains. The planet turns. Seasons cycle. Ice forms. Ice melts. Auroras rise. Auroras fade. And the Arctic continues, not as a frozen relic of the past, but as an active, evolving system at the top of the world. It tests what enters it. It reveals what endures. It stores memory in cold layers. It projects energy into night skies. And it reminds us that some places are not meant to be fully conquered. They are meant to be observed, respected, learned from. The Arctic is not the end of the Earth. It is its quiet frontier. And beyond the polar night, beneath the shifting ice and the silent sky, life persists, measured, as deliberate, resilient, and still, beautifully unfolding.